Hello, my name's Alex Smith. I'm a senior coach, and I'm a senior coach, an executive coach with a specialism in executive functioning, ADHD, autism, and wider neurodiversity. And I partner with the ADHD Advocate as a senior coach. What I was going to look at today is just looking at managing upwards or managing your manager with ADHD, which is often kind of comes up because often an absolute key relationship for work or just a key predictor of whether someone thrives or doesn't thrive in a workplace is the relationship they have with their direct line manager or their overall manager. I thought where I'd start today is looking at a fairy tale, a slightly unusual place to start, but basically anyone that's ever worked with me either through my business coaching or through my ADHD coaching will know that I'm quite fond of referencing Goldilocks and the fairy tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And it's a principle of solution-focused coaching quite a lot, that basically what you say is that in order to define the middle ground or to find something that works for you, you have to understand what too much is and what too little is. So you have some kind of scope in which to frame the kind of middle ground, and really useful for things like particularly routine and structure with ADHD and accountability. Too much structure and the person with ADHD shuts down. Same with too much routine. Too little structure and they become scattered, or they become, they have that choice paralysis as to, if I can't do everything, I can't do anything. And that's why the kind of what's called like Goldilocks questions or the Goldilocks principle is quite useful from a coaching perspective, because what you're trying to define is just right, and that's very much the principle of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Or one of the things that comes up, she goes around, she finds that the Daddy bear's porridge is too lumpy, Mummy bear's porridge is too smooth, the bed's too hard, too soft, the chair is too comfortable, uncomfortable. It's an absolute nightmare for Baby Bear because just right, all of his is just right. So as a result, Goldilocks eats his porridge and destroys all of his stuff. But basically, the principle is that in order to be able to advocate for yourself, you need to know what you're advocating for. So you need to basically have some understanding of what's the right level of structure, what's the right balance for you, what's the right balance between potentially working from home, working in the office, what's the right level of distraction, what's the right level of routine. And this is what often really useful, particularly in thinking in terms of managing upwards or managing your manager, because in order to manage upwards, you need to be able to actually define what you're looking for. And people with ADHD often struggle with that. They find it very hard they often find it very hard to use past experiences to predict future experience, or it tends to be a very non-linear memory system. So a lot of people find it very difficult to kind of remember what's present when things are going well, and potentially notice what's absent when things are going badly. And if you don't have a sense of this, it's very difficult to advocate for yourself, particularly in terms of going to a manager and actually expressing what you may, what would help you to do better at work, or what's currently preventing you from reaching your full potential. So what I often say is, like, managing your manager is often an exercise in, before you actually have any of these conversations, or you build or try and build a relationship with your manager that's more productive, you have to be able to define what's right for you. And and this is what's also pertinent in this regard is two particular quotes in relation to ADHD. So first quote, they're both quite famous quotes. The first one with ADHD is one, it says that with ADHD, you don't want to stop the roller coaster. So the roller coaster is often that speed of thought, the creativity, the need for novelty, the ability to be a non-linear problem solver, to think quickly, and they often say people with ADHD are sprinters, not marathon runners. So you definitely don't want to kind of temper some of the positive qualities of ADHD. But what they do say is that you do want to stop it careering off the rails. If basically there's no parameters around what you're doing, there's no framework around what you're doing, people with ADHD tend to become very, very scattered. They tend to become quite frantic. They flip from one thing to another. ADHD is often a litany of things like canoes and drum kits and short-lived hobbies, short-lived interests. So to some extent, in order to stop yourself flitting too much from one thing to another, you do need some kind of structure or some kind of scope around what you're doing. The other comment, which is actually quite a famous one, probably even more famous, is one from Ned Hallowell. And he says that ADHD is like having a Ferrari engine for a brain with bicycle brakes. a lot of people miss the second bit of this quote. So that the first bit of the quote you see often printed quite a lot on posters, and you see it quite a lot on Instagram and things like that. But the second bit of the quote is often missed off, and actually that's probably, I would say, equally critical. And it's basically what he says is that in order to make use of that for our engine of a brain, you need to strengthen the brakes. So and often that's what you're trying to do from a coaching perspective. You're helping people to get kind of perspective. You're helping people to get habits and routines that effectively slow the mind down and actually allow you to harness the creativity a bit more effectively and more consistently. And so what I would argue is that from an ADHD perspective, an effective manager is someone who's a friend, not a foe in those three areas, So basically, and I think sometimes what's actually really, really helpful, both for the person with ADHD, even for the manager, is to have like quite a frank discussion with them about how you like to be managed. And also, crucially, what's in it for them as well. If you are managed in that way, what are the benefits that they're going to see as a manager? How is it going to help you to work better, more effectively? How is it going to make you make a broader contribution to the business? And sometimes I say a lot of people that I work with, they have disclosed their ADHD diagnosis to their work, either prior to doing the job that they're currently doing, or they've been diagnosed whilst at that company and then have just either been forced to because it's come after a period of ill health, or they basically just felt it's useful to disclose the diagnosis. So a lot of the time it's like you've got the framework to have this discussion. Even if you haven't, quite a lot of people, you can advocate for things that work for ADHD without actually having to expressly say that you've got ADHD. You can talk more about learning preferences and like how your energy works, how you're motivated, things like that. You don't necessarily have to specify I've got ADHD, so I need to be managed in this way. But what I would say is kind of broadening those three areas. If you've got a manager that basically can help in those three areas, you've got a manager that's going to be quite effective for you or quite protective for you in the longer term. So what you want, so just breaking that down, like, if you think about the first one, if you've got a manager that doesn't stop the roller coaster, what does that look like? So a manager doesn't stop the roller coaster is, a lot of people with ADHD are very reliant on extrinsic energy. They often need what I call collaborative foils. They need people they can bounce ideas off. I mean, everyone, there's a lot of talk, and one of the earlier talks for ADHD Awareness Month was on rejection sensitive dysphoria. I sometimes like to articulate the opposite, which, I mean, if you try to do an opposite of rejection sensitive dysphoria, it'd be something like acceptance sensitive euphoria. When you've got energy around what you're doing, when you've got enthusiasm around what you're doing, when you've got someone that you can conceptualize with and bounce ideas off, basically, that's often when good things happen with ADHD, where people feel energized, when they feel valued, when they feel there's interest in what they're doing, and there's an interest that matches their interest and energy. And that's often what a manager can provide, like a collaborative foil, someone that they can work in conjunction with, who, often people with ADHD do very well when they've got kind of quite a close, like, personal relationship with their manager. Conversely, managers who either basically nitpick or basically piss on your bonfire, like every time you have an idea, basically just like tell you why it's not going to work, or don't match that enthusiasm, or even more, don't give any praise or credit, usually disastrous for ADHD. In the absence of feeling valued, in the absence of feeling included, people with ADHD tend to become slightly listless, and they are that heavily reliant on that extrinsic energy. Second thing you talk about is managers who, what a manager can also do is help with the roller coaster careering off the rails. What you tend to find is like micromanagement tends to be pretty much disastrous with ADHD, and is often what happens to people with ADHD as well. The manager basically gets increasingly anxious when things aren't getting done on time, when there's no sign that the person with ADHD is making a start on something. So to manage their own anxiety, what the default that you often see is that the manager starts to micromanage. He starts to be very, very prescriptive about when things should be delivered, to what deadlines, to what standard. Basically, what you're often doing there is you're imposing like neurotypical solutions on ADHD problems. And again, that's very rarely helpful. I mean, I think what you tend to find is micromanagement and intensive scrutiny shuts the ADHD brain down. Where a manager can be really, really helpful though is in terms of effectively defining the framework or the vessel in which a task takes place. You know, what you often say is that, you know, with people with ADHD is they have a brain wired for importance, not for a brain wired for interest, not for importance. So what a manager can do is help to define the relative importance of tasks, or the parameters of scope, or place limits on curiosity. Yeah, you know, we only want to focus on these areas for now. You know, they could also be really helpful in defining the framework and priority of delivery. So what often helps is the manager provides the context, you know, what's out of scope, what's in scope, what's urgent, what's not urgent, what's important, what's less important, you know, what's enough, what's too much for something, and then allows the person with ADHD to work flexibly to their own preferences and strengths within those parameters. Thirdly is, you know, what you say as a manager can be really helpful in strengthening the brakes. And like basically, you know, they say strengthen the brakes, you've got a champion. So a lot of people with ADHD, they struggle with things like perfectionism. They have a very high bar of mastery. They don't know when, you know, they don't have a really good sense of when things are finished already. You know, left to their own devices, they perfect, add complexity on complexity upon complexity, and often do far more than is required of the task, and then burn themselves out in doing it. So what you also tend to see with people with ADHD is, because of the time blindness element of it, because of the need for energy from other people and the people please element, they tend to overpromise or spread themselves too thin, and then either underdeliver or are then forced, you know, to overdeliver and again burn themselves out or overwhelm themselves. So where a manager can be helpful in that regard is in terms of, again, defining the scope of a task, or watching for warning signs of overwhelm or stress or burnout. You know, classic ADHD refrain that you see quite a lot is, if I can't do everything, then I can't do anything. People get very, very scattered when they've got too much to do, and they tend to be quite frantic. They do bits of everything and not a lot of bits of everything and not a lot of bits of everything and not a lot of anything. So there's a lot of incompletions. There's a lot of, you know, things that are partially finished. Too many plates just keep spinning without resolution. And again, a good manager can help with that. They can help to protect against a tendency to overpromise and either underdeliver or be forced to overdeliver because you've overpromised. This brings us on to another thing. What you often find with ADHD is and I've conceptualized it here, is that basically there's often, one of the things I've done quite a lot in executive coaching, and executive coaching with neurodiversity, is I've had the ability to work within businesses. So where I've been privileged, or kind of I've got basically insights in that regard, is you get to hear both sides of the coin. You know, when you do one-to-one coaching, I mean, you're only getting one side of the story a lot of the time. You're getting the story of the person that you're coaching. When you work within businesses, you often get both sides of the story. You get the impression or the view of the situation, the perception of the situation from the person with ADHD, or I mean, some of the people I work with don't have ADHD, but from the employee generally. You might get an alternative perspective from the manager or the HR rep or whoever else you're partnering with in the business. You know, if you're offering this kind of coaching where you're offering specific business support. And what you tend to see from an ADHD perspective that plays out again and again and again, and this is, you know, and the actual language might be slightly different, but it basically boils down to this slide, is there's a marked tendency in ADHD to basically emotionally defend boundaries and needs that haven't either been functionally stated and definitely haven't been communicated. So what the person with ADHD will often say, if I speak to him, is he'll basically say, Alex, my manager's an arsehole. He'll say that, and the way that will be justified is he'll say, well, or she'll say that, you know, for weeks, you know, the manager must have seen that I'm stressed, I'm angry, or whatever it might be, stressed, angry, anxious, overwhelmed, in a crisis, whatever it might be. But despite having seen this, he's done absolutely nothing, or she's done absolutely nothing to help me at all. So he must be an arsehole. He must not care about me. Otherwise, he'd have done something to help. Basically, what you're seeing there often is that people with ADHD tend to reason very emotionally. They kind of feel bad. You know, they reason extremely emotionally by how they feel at any given moment. So what they tend to also assume is that other people will intuit like they do. A lot of people with ADHD are very emotionally intelligent. They're very emotionally sensitive. They're highly empathetic. So what they're kind of assuming is if they feel very strongly about something, they've been displaying anger or anxiety for weeks, surely the manager's going to have noticed and done something about it. What the manager will say is the opposite. What they'll say that they won't. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes you'll just have an awful manager. But if we're working on the assumption here that you've got a pretty good manager, or a manager that fundamentally cares about the staff that they're managing. And I would say the bulk of managers do that. They might have stresses that stop them being as consistent as they want to be in that regard, but there's very few managers that don't care at all about their staff, and most of them don't end up managers for very long. So the manager will say, Alex, he'll say, well, yeah, he'll actually acknowledge it. I've noticed for weeks that whoever it is I'm talking to has been whatever they said they are, stressed, angry, or anxious, or overwhelmed, or they might show that, doesn't seem their normal self, or they seem quite bothered. But what we haven't been clear is they have never been specific in the help and support that they're looking for. The manager will often say, well, I actually wanted to help, and I felt really uneasy that I can't help, and I'm really concerned about their well-being, but they haven't made it clear to me how I can best support them and what they want from me. And that's often a real fundamental clash that you see with ADHD. And then what links to this is boundary setting. People with ADHD are kind of notoriously bad at basically kind of like tangibly setting boundaries in their own minds, and then communicating those boundaries in a very tangible way to other people. So, and so what you actually see basically a lot in ADHD. I work with a lot of clients who come to me to coaching when they're at the point of burnout. They're either kind of in an immediate crisis. They're basically working long hours. They feel that they're behind with their work. They've often been doing that for long periods of time, months or even years. Or sometimes they basically come to me because they've had to go off work sick, or they've actually had to quit a job or resign because they've no longer been able to handle the pressure of that job. And then what you tend to find a lot of the time is that people with ADHD, the way I often describe it is they sacrifice themselves and their own health at the altar of dysfunctional companies or dysfunctional environments. So what neurotypical people do more readily, and again, it's a big generalization, but what they're much better at doing is they're much better at making like qualitative or quantitative decisions based upon the reality of the situation in front of them. So, if the company environment's dysfunctional, if a department's short-staffed or under-resourced or toxic, or if there's less, if you suddenly got half the staff to do the job that you had 2 months ago, typical people are much better often at cutting their cloth accordingly. They will do less, or they will kind of accept that they're going to have to take some shortcuts in terms of quality. What you tend to find with people with ADHD is because they've got that high bar of mastery, that often kind of quite a lot of perfectionism, that fear of the RSD, that fear of being rejected, or that fear of being viewed negatively, they tend to just plow on regardless. They tend to do exactly the same, as if operate in exactly the same way and to the same quality standards as if the company had been fully resourced, or whatever it might be. So what you tend to see is this pattern plays out that I've got 1 to 4 here on the slide. So you'll have something in the company that's dysfunctional, which will have impact for both like ADHD people, staff with ADHD, and neurotypical staff alike. What the person with ADHD will do is that they will start basically emotionally or emotively emphasizing to other people, be it their managers, their peers, that they can't cope. So they'll start saying, oh yeah, I can't manage, or if the status quo continues, it will be unsustainable. However, crucially, what they do, which is different to a lot of neurotypical people, is they continue to plow on regardless. So effectively, they're telling people that they can't cope, but basically they are continuing to cope, often like dysfunctionally, by working too long hours, not sleeping, basically working their weekends, effectively basically doing far more than the demands of their work requires, and often far more than their company expects them to do in that situation. And then finally, what will happen is that the person with ADHD will, if they do that for too long, they will burn out, they will have a crisis, and they will often have to go off sick or resign, at which point the company is compelled to address and resolve the problems in question. And what I say to people with the best, and again, this is based, and I can remember from my own, I spent 15, 16 years managing editorial teams and at different levels of seniority. And even I would like to think of myself, and I had a good reputation as a manager who was developed and cared about their staff. But if you've got a situation like that, the challenge that you're giving a manager is that they haven't got a problem to solve, you know, and that's what I often say to people with ADHD. Everyone is disappointingly dispensable. I mean, that shouldn't be seen as a negative, but what it means is there's never a good reason to sacrifice your health for the wider good of a business, because however hard you work, if your job function is no longer required, the business will get rid of you. I mean, and this is the thing that's basically, and the issue here is that if you tell someone that you cannot cope, but you continue to do so because you're coping, there isn't, the manager's more than likely to kind of turn his efforts to someone else who basically has said they're not coping and is working their hours, so that there is work that's not being done. If you're doing all your work and telling people you can't do all your work, you know, even the best managers in the world, you know, they're going to be firefighting where there is a problem to solve, and you basically are allowing them not to solve a problem by doing probably more than you should be doing. And this links to another thing around managing upwards, which kind of is quite pertinent with ADHD, is that people with ADHD tend to do two things. They tend to not ask for help anywhere near enough, and then when they ask for help, they tend to shoot themselves in the foot in the way in which they ask for help. So one of the main ways they do this is that they dilute the message. You know, lots of things contribute here, like people pleasing, the inability to kind of, like, often people with ADHD kind of sense things, but they struggle to show their workings, or kind of, you know. So what you often see is that it's quite difficult, because from a manager's perspective, I mean, I used to find this quite a lot. If you've got someone who comes to you and they say something very, very vague, like, I need, which is classic kind of things that people with ADHD will say, is that I need help developing my career, you know, or I'm stressed, can you help? Or I'm overwhelmed, can you help? Even if you want to help as a manager, it's very different. You know, managers are busy themselves. So if they can't, if there isn't something specifically they can do, like a course they can sign you up to, a person they can put you in touch with, you know, whatever it might be, a training program they can sign you up for, or kind of a mentor they can, you know, mentoring scheme they can put you on, it's very difficult to do something. You know, if you don't have something clear to do in the here and now, it's very difficult to help someone when they're, you know, what they're asking for is incredibly vague. It's often much better if you say, well, look, I've seen this, if you want to develop your career, I've seen this opportunity in X department, you know, would you be able to put me in touch, you know, would you be able to arrange for me to have a coffee with the manager of that department? Or would you be able to give me your insights into how, you know, how you would prepare for an interview, or something like that, something that's kind of specific that the manager can help with. The other thing that you tend to find with ADHD is that people often, you know, basically they only ask for help when they're at a point of emotional discomfort or emotional overwhelm. So they tend to be overly emotive. They, you know, often then it's too late. It's difficult to put the protective remedies in place. The other thing you see is they often go straight for the big guns. They basically, you know, they, having not asked for help for weeks or months, they then suddenly request a meeting with their manager and then just bombard them with with a litany of ills and all the things that they need help with all at once. And I mean, often what the manager will say is, yeah, I really want to help here, but I feel really ambushed. You know, I can't help with all of these things all at once. You know, I've got a big team to manage, but I can't see a specific one. I can't see a wood from the trees that I can help with there. So that the manager kind of basically feels ambushed and doesn't know where to start. So big recommendation I always give to people with ADHD about managing upwards is, don't dilute the message. You know, be very clear about what you want help with, and be very sure that the kind of person you're asking for help is best positioned to be able to offer that help. You know, and very much target the help you want from the person that's most able to provide that solution or remedy. And then finally, it's an insights. It's like one of the things that I particularly my business coaching, when I was working, you know, doing in-house business coaching, but also, you know, having worked with a lot of, you know, quite high level executives and quite successful entrepreneurs, some of whom have ADHD, a lot of people are neurotypical. So I've worked with quite a lot of quite senior and successful people in various business contexts. And when you start working with people like that, you assume that they must have some kind of like alchemy or elixir of productivity. And, you know, and you often find that they don't. You know, it's so one of the things that I've found, and one of the biggest insights that I've gained from kind of coaching and successful ex-executives and entrepreneurs is, contrary to popular opinion, most of them don't have some magic elixir of productivity. They don't have some magical time management strategy that, you know, that is elusive to everyone else. they aren't, a lot of them are very, very capable in their fields, but and they might, they often, they are kind of very, very much, but a lot of people with ADHD are very, very bright. They're very good at solving disparate problems or connecting disparate knowledge, but they don't tend to be like superior intellectual beings, and they're not running on kryptonite whilst everyone else is running on diesel. They haven't got some like magic fuel or magic drug. They also tend, so you've got a lot of people, I suppose, that in their fields have got confidence, or have got that confidence based on experiences, or have failed in a number of businesses, so are kind of happy to take risks or whatever it might be. But they're not distinct from everyone else. They normally have the same doubts, the same fears, the same zones of comfort and discomfort. They all often have like some form of imposter syndrome. They have slow days where they don't get things done, where they're not like relentlessly productive. They have frustrations, like everyone else does. So, and normally they have those frustrations like magnified, or with bells and whistles on them, because often, like entrepreneurs, they're having to make, huge, they're often working in like what you often say is that, they're working in areas of breadth rather than depth knowledge. So they're often having to turn their hand to a lot of things in quick succession, like sales, marketing, production, whatever, kind of like, mailing, HR. So often they're having to make a large number or large volume of micro decisions, both big and small, in any given day. So often these kind of frustrations, not only do they have them, but they're actually magnified for people at the top end of businesses, or that are kind of running their own businesses. So what you actually find, though, is that what I found kind of almost universally they do have, if they don't have this magic elixir of productivity, they don't have this superior intellect. What they are is like fiercer gatekeepers of their time and energy. And what they do, what you tend to find is that they're very, very good at very kind of fiercely and very assiduously protecting both their time and energy. If they know to get through a day, they need to go to the gym at 10 a.m. They basically make sure that they're not contactable at 10 a.m. If they want to read their kids a story before bed, they make sure they're home at 7 p.m. or whatever it might be to read the kids a story before bed. What they're very good at is at defending boundaries of time and energy, and asserting them to other people and not allowing them to be encroached upon. And that's what you often find, and often they're ably assisted in this. I mean, often, like, one of my entrepreneurs that I work with, he says basically he's only successful as his choice of PA, or another one, similar, or office manager, or whoever they have. Normally they will have someone else that often protects their diary for them. So they also have another Minotaur working with them, hence the image of the Minotaur, to make sure that their time and energy can't be encroached upon. And that's the kind of takeaway I would give, the final takeaway about managing upwards. And it's basically, a lot of people with ADHD struggle to do that. They struggle to set reliable boundaries around their time and their energy. They struggle to communicate to others when they're overloaded or when they're kind of underloaded. They struggle to protect their most productive times, or like leave work on time. They struggle to maintain hobbies, and they tend to stay late. They tend to have like a work-life balance which is often skewed too much towards work and not enough towards life, and then it's not recuperative enough for them. So what I often say to people, is very much this: to take away on the right. It's basically, if you don't view your time and energy and work-life balance as important, and if you don't get into the habit of setting boundaries around it and defending it robustly, everyone else will take their lead from you. If you're willing to work every weekend, they'll quite happily give you work every weekend to work on. I think that's the biggest insight. It's very much, a lot of people with ADHD feel that often their manager, it's for their manager to notice, or for their manager to defend and set boundaries for them, or tell them not to do things. Manager can definitely help in that, but you've got to kind of like prime the cannon, really. You've got to let them know, if you've got to be like the Minotaur, you've got to be the defender of your time, energy, and work-life balance, because if you don't, no one else will protect it for you.